Okay, we'll start with this, a rather spicy story that broke earlier today. Leaked emails show Clarissa Shields' efforts to fight on Jake Paul's undercard. Jake Paul was contacted by Clarissa Shields' team in an attempt to have her feature on his fight cards, according to leaked emails. The YouTube star has had a sensational rise in boxing, defeating Ben Askren and former UFC champion Tyron Woodley twice in a lucrative 3-fight year. During this time, Paul has been embroiled in a feud with female star Shields, who he accused of trying to fight on his bumper cards. Leaked emails uncovered by USA Today Sports show Shields' team trying to contact Paul's advisor, Nikisa Bidarian, before the exhibition bout between Mike Tyson and Joy Rhones Jr. in 2020. Bidarian recalled, "Clarissa's obviously one of the best female boxers of all time, but the numbers of viewers she has didn't make sense for us in terms of what Mark was hoping to achieve for her in purse money.
This is embarrassing.
The way she's been carrying on for all these weeks, all these months, she's too good to fight on the undercard of Jake Paul."
Well, her own team doesn't seem to think so.
I mean, it all makes sense now. It all makes sense as to why it is Clarissa Shields has been going at this guy for as long as she's been going at this guy. It always felt a little different coming from Clarissa, and now I think we know why.
It always felt personal.
Clarissa Shields herself has denied contacting Jake Paul to feature on his cards, so I didn't think it added to the Tyson Jones pay-per-view, which ended up being the 8th largest in history.
Plausible deniability.
That's what that is when it's Clarissa's team, not Clarissa herself sending out the emails.
Oh yeah, she can deny it.
Another email followed from Shields' manager, Mark Taffet, who continued to have a dialogue with Shields about the possibility of a crossover bout on the card Paul fought Askren. Clarissa had a historic win to become the first man or woman in the 4-belt era to win an undisputed title in 2 weight divisions, Taffet wrote Bidarian on March 15th. "We are now beginning a plan for our next few fights and would love to discuss our plan with you to see if Triller is interested in being the video platform of the world's greatest female fighter. We would love to participate on your April 17th card if you have a slot available." Paul defeated Askren in April last year before turning his attention to Woodley, with Shields promoter Dimitri Salita now attempting to contact Bidarian. Salita wrote on July 14th, "We have offices and staff in Michigan and promoted numerous events on Showtime. If you need any help with logistics, running the event, local ticket sellers, etc., would gladly be involved. Looking forward to connecting." Shields has criticized Paul as she believes he was taking opportunities from quote-unquote real boxers. But Paul quickly fired back, mocking Shields and claiming that his client, Amanda Serrano, will beat her.
Do you get the sense he started working with Amanda to spite Clarissa?
All's fair in love and war, that's what they say. However, the 26-year-old Clarissa Shields has moved to deny all knowledge of the emails being sent and confirmed she wouldn't fight on a Paul card. "I was never ever supposed to fight on an undercard of Jake Paul's. I don't care what the email says."
Of course you were never going to fight on his undercard. He wouldn't let you.
In spite of Mark Taffet and Dimitri Salita's efforts, your manager, your promoter, tried vehemently to get you a slot on one of his cards for months.
And no dice.
That YouTuber you've been lambasting for all these weeks and all these months. He didn't want nothing to do with you. Clarissa Shields added, "I would never do that, no matter how much they're paying me, and everything has to go through me." And it didn't go through Clarissa.
It didn't go through Clarissa that her promoter and her manager were emailing Jake Paul.
Listen, this goes all the way back to the Tyson versus Joy Rhones Jr. fight.
It's a year ago, ain't it?
Your people have been emailing his people for an opportunity for something like a year.
This is fucking embarrassing.
And you know why it's embarrassing? I'll tell you why it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing because even if it's the way Clarissa says it is, and she had no knowledge of these dialogues, or maybe she's lying, maybe she knew the whole time and now she's just embarrassed and trying to save face. Any way you slice it, Clarissa Shields is not above.
She ain't too good to fight on Jake Paul's undercard.
At least not too good in her own handler's opinion, her manager, her promoter, who tried vehemently for something like a year to get her a slot on one of his undercards. And Jake preferred to give that slot to Amanda Serrano, not Clarissa Shields. If Clarissa didn't know that all of this was going on, then
Then she certainly didn't help her situation lambasting Jake for a year.
regularly taking shots at that guy. I don't know why. That's if she didn't know. If she did know, then that just means she's bitter. She's jilted.
You're running around telling everybody you're too good to fight on his undercard.
All the while, Mark Taffet and Dimitri Salita are begging this guy to let you have a spot, let you get a slot on one of his undercards.
This is fucking embarrassing.
I don't believe Clarissa Shields' version of the story. I don't. I think she knew the whole time that Mark Taffet and Dimitri Salita wanted to work with Jake Paul, and I think the reason that Clarissa has been going at this guy as much as she's been going at this guy the last 12 months or so is because he didn't want to work with her.
You see, now it all makes sense.
It never made sense to me before Clarissa Shields exhibiting the kind of energy she was exhibiting towards Jake Paul and whatever it was he was doing. It didn't make sense to me before. I thought perhaps she was angry that he knocked out Nate Robinson. I don't know, maybe Nate's her favorite basketball player, or maybe there's a tribal element to all of this hostility. I really couldn't wrap my mind around it. But now, given these revelations, these leaked emails, it all makes sense.
When she said he was taking opportunities from real boxers,
She may have said that in the third person, but she was really talking about herself.
she's expecting this guy to grovel at her feet?
The only reason all of this is embarrassing is because Clarissa has been carrying on the way she's been carrying on, saying she would never, she's too good, Jake Paul, he's beneath her, all the while her own team.
Oh, they didn't share that opinion.
Clarissa Shields herself acknowledges that these emails exist. It's for this reason she says she doesn't care what the emails say. Well, people don't have to care what you say, so long as those emails are real, and so long as they exist, and so long as you acknowledge that they exist.
Why don't you pipe down about this guy and his undercard?
You have to understand, this was going on as far back as the Mike Tyson versus Joy Rones Jr. exhibition match. And it took the Jake Paul people this long to leak those emails. What that communicates to me is that they were trying to take the high road. They wanted to be the bigger people in the situation. But Clarissa kept poking the bear, kept shooting off at the mouth. She forced their hand. She forced them to expose her.
They sat on this information for about a year.
They could have publicized all of this a long time ago, but it took this long. I think it took this long because they didn't want things to get messy between them.
Any messier than they already are.
Hey, this goes back to what I'm always telling you guys about Clarissa. She's good at what she does, but she's got an overbearing attitude and the personality of a bear trap. People don't want to be around her. The people she offends with her overbearing attitude and that personality, that sparkling personality. Jake Paul is under no obligation to work with Clarissa Shields.
She needs a lesson in commerce.
Free enterprise, because in spite of her talents inside of the ring, outside of the ring, she just ain't got the foggiest fucking idea how this stuff works. I think she poked the bear one too many times is what I think. I think the Jake Paul people tried to take the high road, and Clarissa Shields, in her fashion, made that very hard to do.
So they exposed her.
In other news, Future of Boxing, Jermall Charlo posted this to his Instagram stories, and it's a graphic image of himself taking on none other than Caleb Plant. A fight that is...
It's a good fight, if I'm being honest.
Those of you that have been following the channel the last couple of weeks, last couple of months, will know I've been saying Jermall Charlo's time at middleweight is all but up because he doesn't want to unify with Demetrius Andrade. He's certainly not going to get the winner of Golovkin versus Murata, which will likely be rescheduled for some time this year.
Jaime Munguia seems to be closing in on him.
Jaime, who I very recently heard is supposed to be taking on Demetrius Ballard. I half expected the WBC to order a final eliminator between Jaime and Carlos Adames.
That's a story for another day.
Nothing is happening for Jermall Charlo at 160 pounds. Nothing. Absolutely nothing.
He's been there for something like 4 or 5 years.
Not exaggerating. His very first fight at the weight was the Jorge Sebastian Highland fight that took place in 2017.
He's looked less than spectacular.
Which is what makes this a very intriguing fight, a very intriguing endeavor. If Caleb Plant is to be Jermall Charlo's very first fight at 168 pounds, I'm not against it. I'm all for it. I will say he's being a bit selective.
He didn't want to move up for David Benavidez, but he'll move up for Caleb Plant.
I often think that when Canelo Alvarez's critics talk about Canelo avoiding David Benavidez, They are projecting. They're projecting Jermall Charlo's issues onto Canelo.
Because if anybody's avoiding David Benavidez, it's that guy.
Though David Benavidez and who is or isn't avoiding him isn't the focus here. The focus here is a potential super middleweight matchup between Jermall Charlo and Caleb Plant. A good choice for a maiden voyage into the super middleweight division. Jermall Charlo has not looked so spectacular as a middleweight that he's proven he's head and shoulders above a guy like Caleb Plant. Caleb Plant, who has one of the thinner resumes in the super middleweight division, though all the same, he is a cut above the kind of guys that Jermall Charlo's been fighting.
Though he is coming off a knockout loss.
Does Jermall Charlo pack enough punching power to stop Caleb Plant once again and give him his second professional loss? Or will Caleb Plant's flimsy shoulder roll be just enough to disarm Jermall Charlo, who I reiterate has looked less than spectacular? I mean, this is a guy who couldn't stop Juan Montiel, for Christ's sake.
Yeah, Jermall's not a prolific puncher.
He's a sharpshooter, is what he is. He's a guy who likes to pick his spots, pick his punches, get the guy hurt, and then unload. Against a defensively minded fighter like a Caleb Plant, who's trying to limit how many opportunities he gives you, hit him with something, hit him with something hard, it creates a very interesting situation, it does. But is it interesting enough that a fight like this should be billed as a pay-per-view? When you're talking about PBC fighters, that's a question you gotta ask, because nobody in the American boxing scene is as insistent on putting fights on pay-per-view as
they are.
Is Jermall Charlo versus Caleb Plant for no belt at all? Is that pay-per-view worthy? That is the $80 question. It's $80 is likely what the PBC is going to want to charge you guys for this fight.
There's no quality control over there.
They put Charles Martin versus Luis Ortiz on pay-per-view. Coming up, we've got Keith Thurman versus Mario Barrios, also on pay-per-view. So when it comes to the PBC, their fights and their fighters, it's a question you have to ask. Is this value for money?
Just because it's a halfway decent fight with halfway decent fighters don't mean it belongs on pay-per-view.
As we speak, Teofimo Lopez, who's coming off a loss the same way that Caleb Plant is coming off a loss. He's targeting a Jose Zapata fight, and I sincerely doubt the Top Rank's going to put that on pay-per-view.
It's a similar situation.
Quality of the fight's about the same, but I don't think the Top Rank is going to charge an arm and a leg for me and you to see that thing, whereas with this fight, it's conceivable that the PBC might want to put this on pay-per-view.
You know, I heard a rumor Canelo's next fight is going to be on Showtime.
If these two guys are fighting each other, then who would Canelo Alvarez be fighting on Showtime? David Benavidez, perhaps? Perhaps Anthony Durrell?
I'm not paying for that.
I think we'll get the answers to these questions and more in due course. Finally, in heavyweight news, David Higgins, Joseph Parker's manager, says Parker would like Ruiz rematch. Money is too low for Hrgovic.
You think you're going to get offered life-altering money for Andy Ruiz?
Luis Ortiz, due to a hand injury suffered in last Saturday's knockout win over Charles Martin, turned down the opportunity, which is when the IBF offered Ortiz's opportunity to Parker. Parker, like Ortiz, is hunting for bigger names and much more lucrative opportunities. One of the fights that Parker would like to have is a rematch with former unified champion Andy Ruiz, who lost a close 12-round decision to the New Zealand boxer a few years ago. Joseph has a great profile in the UK and the Asia-Pacific region. The Holy Grail is to become a draw on both sides of the Atlantic, and only a few have done that. For Joseph to grow his career, he should look stateside and look for big knockouts against American fighters, Higgins told Sky. That gives him a worldwide reputation while he waits for his title shot. If you don't do that, you end up like Anthony Joshua, only respected in certain parts of London. A rematch with Andy Ruiz Jr. would be fantastic. Parker beat Ruiz Jr. in a very close fight in New Zealand. Had it been in America, it may have gone the other way.
And you think people respect you ducking Hrgovic?
Don't high risk and low reward me. There's an obvious reward attached to a Philippe Hrgovic fight, and everybody knows it.
This guy's talking about title shots. Title shot. You ain't got no title shot.
What do you mean you waiting for a title shot? You don't get a title shot unless you beat Philippe Hrgovic. The article continues, Andy wants a rematch. Fighting him in America is interesting because he has a cult following among Mexican Americans. If Parker stuck to a game plan, he would beat Deontay Wilder easily. Dillian White, the long-awaited White rematch would be interesting. According to Higgins, the money being presented for a Hrgovic fight is way below what Parker generates for other contests, which makes it a very problematic option to even consider. There is an economic problem with Hrgovic.
Economic problem. The problem ain't economic, it's that he's too risky.
If they offered you the same money they're offering you for Hrgovic to fight some other guy, not named Hrgovic, if they offered you that same money for another guy like Alex Lapai, you'd take the fight.
If they offered you that same kind of money for a guy like Shondell Winters,
You'd take the fight, so it's clear that it's not the money that's the problem. It's Philippe Hrgovic. You don't want to know. Higgins continued, we funded, paying big money to stage Parker versus Andy Ruiz Jr. in New Zealand. Does Hrgovic have a home fan base anywhere?
did Shondell Winters?
He being Philippe Hrgovic, has attained a high ranking but has no fan base. So the money on offer is laughable for somebody like Parker. Also, this fight is at the back of the eliminator queue because the other belts must be sorted out. So Parker could fight Hrgovic for a payday that would barely cover his training costs. Win, then sit out for a year waiting for his shot.
What shot? You don't have a shot.
And if you liked your chances against Philippe Hrgovic, we wouldn't be hearing this elaborate explanation. They're talking about an Andy Ruiz Jr. fight, as if Andy Ruiz is offering these guys any kind of money to do that fight here in America. And if they did do that fight here in America, you think this is what American boxing fans want to see?
It's not.
For perspective, Joseph Parker barely made it out of that Andy Ruiz Jr. fight. He did. But he likes his chances against Andy a lot more than he likes his chances against Philippe. Philippe, who hasn't fought the Anthony Joshuas and Andy Ruizes, Dillian Vites, and Derek Chisorias of the world. And better still, Joseph doesn't want to know.
Don't high risk, low reward me.
It's a high risk, it is, but there's also a high reward attached to that risk. You become the IBF's mandatory challenger, and we all know the IBF takes their mandatories very seriously. It's a guarantee you get the winner of Joshua versus Usyk. It's only a matter of time, but you don't want to risk it.
If it was Shondell Winters for this same money, they'd take the fight.
And what is an IBF final eliminator to become the mandatory challenger for the winner of Joshua versus Usyk?
They'd take that fucking fight in a heartbeat.
Yeah, if it was Shondell Winters or a guy like him, but if it's Philippe Hrgovic,
Well, he doesn't have a fan base.
this is far too behind in the queue.
This won't cover our training expenses.
Why don't you just cut the fucking malarkey? You don't like your chances against this guy.
There is a big reward on the other side of this fight.
Your real problem is you don't think you'll make it to the other side. The other side of this fight. That's what it really is.
It's a duck.
It's a fucking duck. Plain and simple.